Hi, I'm Callie from CRK Training. In today's blog video, I'd like to talk to you about one of the most common challenges that people ask me about, and that is the canter transition. So the canter transition can be kind of a tough thing for both new riders and also for experienced riders. So for new rides, the canter is a gait that starts to combine bigger movement with more speed, and the transition into the canter can be difficult depending on the horse. So some horses have a pretty easy, gentle transition. Some horses have more of a big jump with going into the canter. So when you're just learning to ride, that bigger movement or that bigger kind of jump into the faster gait can be a little bit unbalancing. And for experienced riders, we're always trying to get the canter transition more smooth. We're trying to get our horse more responsive, and we're just trying to make that transition more balanced so that we can be more balanced then, and our horse can move better once we're in the canter. I have 3 tips today that I want to share with you on improving your canter transition. But first, I'm going to kind of give you an extra bonus tip. And this is, make sure that you understand what cue the horse understands and what cue you're going to use when you ask for the canter. So most of the time we're using a seat and a leg cue to ask for the canter, but it can vary depending on how the horse was trained. So if you're in a lesson situation, make sure that you ask, what does this horse understand as the cue for canter? And that can make it easier, especially if you're a new rider learning. Now, if you maybe have your own horse or you want to train the horse to a specific cue, I would recommend actually starting with a verbal cue. So the reason that a verbal cue for canter can be helpful is because even if you're riding and you're not in the exact right place to apply a physical cue, or if you're just kind of learning your balance, the verbal cue can help the horse understand exactly what it is that you're asking for when you're asking for the canter. So a good way to do this is just to work on the lunge line, teach the verbal cue for canter, and then you can start to use that same cue when you're riding later on. Now, the first of the 3 big tips that I want to share with you is to work on just going faster at the trot. So obviously when we pick up the canter, we have more speed, and especially if you're just learning to ride, just that extra speed in itself can be a little bit unnerving. So get comfortable with asking for a bigger trot and being able to change the speed of the trot. And this does 2 things. One, this gets you as the rider just comfortable with moving faster and asking the horse to move faster. And it also helps the horse and helps you to make sure that the horse is moving responsively off of your go forward cues, so that when you ask for faster and you tell him to go faster, he's there and he's responsive. If it takes a lot of leg pressure or it takes a long time for him to respond to going faster just at the trot, that can give you something to work on that's going to really help when you're ready to ask for even faster into your canter transition. The second tip is don't tense. So when we're asking for the canter, if we start to get tight on the horse, whether that tightness is in our legs, whether that tightness is in our arms, or in our core in our seat, or all over our body, when we start to get tight, that's going to actually inhibit the forward movement of the horse. So even if we're saying canter and we're trying to kick, but if our whole body is super tight on the horse, then we're really making it a lot harder for him to go forward, and we're making it really hard for him to have a nice, smooth, and balanced canter transition. So 2 areas to kind of specifically pay attention to, actually 3. The first one is your leg. So a lot of times when we get a little bit nervous on the horse, we start to grip with our legs. For some people it's in the knee, for some people it's in the calves or even in the thigh. But if you start to grip the horse, then again, as you tighten with your leg, it's going to make it harder for his barrel to swing and harder for him to go forward. So get used to feeling where you're tense, where you're holding that tension, and try to improve your ability to be able to just release it. So the first area is in your legs. Second area is in your arms. So it's the same thing. If unconsciously you get a little bit worried when he's starting to go faster, and you kind of lock your arm. As the horse goes to move and his head and neck have a different movement, kind of a swing as you go into the canter, if he hits the bit during that movement because your arms are tense, or if you bounce and you accidentally pull back on the bit or on the bridle, then that's going to probably kind of stop the transition and make him less likely to want to do it again in the future if he's essentially getting punished in the mouth for trying to do the transition. The third area of tension is actually in your seat. So a lot of times when we're trying to canter, we're trying to sit deep and we're thinking about kind of sitting and keeping our seat in the saddle. What can happen when we do that is we end up basically clenching our glutes, clenching our muscles, and a hard muscle is going to bounce a lot more than a soft muscle. So think about your glutes when you're riding, and especially when you're at the canter, and see if you can make sure that you're keeping those muscles specifically soft, not tight and knotted up where it's going to make you bounce out of the saddle when the horse does pick up the canter. The third tip that I have for you for riding the canter is to visualize it. So this can really help a lot. You can start to visualize it when you're off the horse, just thinking about the movement, thinking about the feeling of the movement and what you want that nice transition to feel like, how you want it to ride. And then you can also really kind of think your way through the transition. So one of the best ways that I have found to do this is to think about the rhythm and the tempo of moving from trot to canter. So the trot is a 2-beat gait. So it's got kind of a beat of 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. And the canter is a 3-beat gait. So it has more of a beat of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And I find that when you're making that transition from trot to canter, if you can start to think about the change in those beats, if you can think about the change in that tempo, and I will actually even kind of say that like I just did there in my head, and I find that that really helps with softening your body and also kind of getting you thinking about the canter, and the horse can pick up on that. So the next time that you do your canter transition, actually think through like 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Think about that change in the rhythm, and I think that'll really help you. The second thing is to imagine the transition as a lift. So instead of thinking about pushing your horse forward into the canter and just having him like go faster into the canter, imagine that he's lifting into the canter. And this can really help you if you're getting the transition, but it feels like it's too fast, or you're trying to make it smoother or lighter on the part of your horse. Imagining the lift, that you're asking the horse to lift himself into canter instead of going forward into it, can really help a lot. And it's not necessarily something that you're doing physically that different, but just the changing kind of your perception of what you're trying to get will change slightly how you ride it, and that can make a big difference. So I hope that these tips for the canter help you. If you have any to add, go ahead and put them in the comments below. I would love to see your comments or your questions on this one. And as always, if you're watching this video anywhere besides crktrainingblog.com, that's where the best comments and the best conversation happens, and I'd love to see you there.